My name is Francis, and I'm 58 years old. 26 years ago, I became a single mother when my daughter Jessica was just 2. I watched her grow from a curious toddler into this brilliant, accomplished woman standing before me in that stunning white wedding dress. As I sat in that church pew watching her say her vows, I felt this overwhelming surge of pride mixed with something I couldn't quite name. Something that felt like distance. You see, I'd sacrificed everything to give Jessica the life I never had, working myself to the bone so she could have opportunities I only dreamed of. But lately, I'd been feeling like maybe those sacrifices meant less to her than they did to me. Before I share what happened that day, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Please hit that like button and subscribe for more real stories. You won't believe what I discovered about my own daughter. Let me take you back to the beginning, because understanding this story means understanding the life Jessica and I built together. When her father walked out on us, leaving nothing but unpaid bills and broken promises, I was 24 with a toddler and no college degree. I remember sitting on the floor of our tiny apartment, surrounded by overdue notices, holding Jessica while she slept, promising her that somehow, some way, I'd give her everything she deserved. Those early years were brutal. I worked 3 jobs just to keep us afloat. Mornings, I served coffee and eggs at Murphy's Diner, smiling at customers, while my feet ached in second-hand shoes. Afternoons, I filed papers at a small law office, grateful for the steady paycheck, even though it barely covered rent. Evenings, after Jessica was asleep, I cleaned office buildings until midnight, my hands raw from industrial cleaners, and my back screaming from hours of vacuuming and mopping. Our apartment was cramped, just 2 bedrooms in a complex where the neighbours were too loud and the heating rarely worked properly. Jessica's room was decorated with garage sale finds and hand-me-down furniture I'd painted bright colours to make them cheerful. I wore the same 3 outfits to work in rotation, carefully mending tears and replacing buttons to make them last. But Jessica, she always had new school supplies, clean clothes that fit, and a lunch packed with love notes tucked inside. I made sure she never felt the weight of our financial struggles. When she needed books for school, I'd tell her the library was having a special sale. When she wanted to join activities, I'd find ways to pay the fees by picking up extra cleaning shifts. Jessica was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Her teachers constantly praised her curiosity, her dedication, her natural intelligence. She earned scholarships that I secretly supplemented with my savings, never letting her know how many meals I skipped to make sure those applications got submitted on time. By the time she graduated high school as valedictorian, I felt like we'd conquered the world together. She got into a prestigious college on partial scholarship, and I was so proud I cried for 3 straight days. That's where she met Jake, a business major whose family owned a chain of upscale hotels across the Northeast. The Harrison family lived in a completely different universe than ours, one filled with country club memberships, designer everything, and casual conversations about quarterly profits. When Jessica first brought Jake home during their sophomore year, I could see the nervousness in her eyes. She'd grown up in our little world, but now she was experiencing something entirely different. Jake was polite, well-mannered, clearly smitten with my daughter. But I noticed how Jessica seemed to choose her words carefully around him, how she steered conversations away from certain topics about our life. The first time I met Jake's parents at a restaurant downtown, I felt completely out of my depth. Mrs. Harrison wore a pearl necklace that probably cost more than my car, and Mr. Harrison discussed business deals over appetizers that cost what I made in a day of cleaning. They were kind enough, but I could feel the invisible barriers, the unspoken acknowledgement that we came from different worlds. Jessica seemed nervous throughout the entire dinner, and I started to understand that maybe she was beginning to feel embarrassed about where she came from. The changes in Jessica started small, so subtle, I almost convinced myself I was imagining them. During her junior year, when she'd call to tell me about her classes or weekend plans, she'd mention new friends, but never talked about introducing me to them. When I asked about visiting her at school, she always had reasons why it wasn't a good time. Too much studying, too many exams, the dorm was being renovated. The excuses felt reasonable individually, but together they formed a pattern I couldn't ignore. The first real crack appeared during a conversation with Jake about her family background. I happened to answer the phone when he called looking for Jessica, and we chatted briefly about her childhood. Later, when Jessica called me back, she was agitated. She told me Jake had mentioned our conversation and I'd apparently given him the wrong impression about my work. According to Jessica, I should have been clearer that I worked in management, rather than just saying I worked at various businesses. Management. That stung. I understood she wanted to put our struggles in the best possible light, but hearing her reframe my 3 grueling jobs as some kind of managerial position felt like she was erasing the reality of what we'd been through together. When I gently pointed out that I'd never worked in management, she snapped that I didn't understand how complicated college social dynamics could be. The engagement party was my first real glimpse into how deep these feelings ran. Jessica looked absolutely radiant in a blue dress that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. The Harrison family had insisted on hosting the party at their country club, and I'd saved up for months to buy an outfit that wouldn't embarrass Jessica. When it came time for introductions, Jessica presented me to Jake's relatives as my mum who helped raise me, as if there had been someone else involved, as if I hadn't been the only one there through every fever, every heartbreak, every triumph. Throughout the evening, I noticed how Jessica positioned herself in conversations. She'd mention her academic achievements, her internships, her plans for the future, but she'd skillfully avoid talking about her childhood or family background. When Jake's cousin asked about her upbringing, she said she'd had to work really hard to get where she was implying that her success was entirely self-made. The pride I'd felt watching her network and charm the room curdled into something more complicated. Later that week, we had our first real argument about the wedding plans. Jessica wanted something small and simple. She said something that fit within a reasonable budget. When I offered to contribute my savings to help make her day special, she declined with a coldness that caught me completely off guard. She said she and Jake preferred to keep things modest, that they didn't need help from anyone. The way she said anyone made it clear she meant she didn't want help from me specifically. I started feeling like an unwelcome intruder in my own daughter's life. Every conversation felt carefully managed, every interaction seemed designed to keep me at arm's length. The woman I'd raised the girl, who used to tell me everything, was becoming a stranger who seemed increasingly uncomfortable with my presence in her new world. Wedding planning season brought everything into sharp focus. The Harrison family approached Jessica's wedding like a business merger with detailed spreadsheets, vendor meetings, and discussions about guest list politics that made my head spin. Every planning session I attended felt like a diplomatic mission where I had to carefully navigate unspoken rules and social expectations I'd never learned. Mrs. Harrison had opinions about everything from the colour of the napkins to the appropriateness of various menu options. During one particularly tense meeting about the ceremony music, she made a comment about keeping things tasteful and traditional, while glancing meaningfully in my direction. When I suggested a song that had special meaning for Jessica and me, Mrs. Harrison smiled tightly and said they'd already selected something more appropriate for the venue's acoustics. Jessica never defended me during these moments. She'd sit quietly, occasionally nodding along with the Harrison family's suggestions, never once advocating for my input or making me feel like my opinions mattered. I started to realize that in her mind, I'd become the embarrassing relative who needed to be managed rather than celebrated. The breaking point came when I accidentally overheard a phone conversation Jessica was having with Jake's sister about the wedding party dynamics. Jessica was explaining how challenging it was to balance family obligations with social expectations. She mentioned that her mother had never really provided much growing up, and that she'd essentially raised herself through scholarships and hard work. Listening to her rewrite our history, erasing every sacrifice I'd made, felt like being stabbed repeatedly with small, precise cuts. That night, I sat in my kitchen, surrounded by photo albums filled with pictures of Jessica's childhood, birthday parties I'd thrown with homemade decorations, school plays where I'd been the loudest one cheering in the audience, graduations where I'd worked double shifts to afford the celebration dinner afterward. Every image reminded me of moments when I'd chosen Jessica's needs over my own comfort, her opportunities over my own desires. I decided to buy an expensive outfit for the wedding, something that would help me blend in with the Harrison family's circle. I spent more money than I'd ever spent on clothing in my life, purchasing a sophisticated dress and matching accessories that made me feel elegant and confident. When Jessica saw me trying it on during a final fitting appointment, her reaction wasn't pride or excitement, it was embarrassment. She asked me if I was sure the outfit wasn't too much for the occasion, suggesting that maybe something simpler would be more appropriate. The rehearsal dinner was held at an exclusive restaurant where the Harrison family had reserved a private dining room. I found myself seated at the far end of the table, physically and metaphorically separated from the main conversations. Throughout the evening, Jake's relatives made small talk that consistently emphasized their business successes, travel experiences, and cultural sophistication. Every story seemed designed to highlight the differences between their lifestyle and mine. Jessica worked the room like a professional politician, charming everyone with stories about her college achievements and career aspirations. She'd transformed herself into someone who belonged in this world, someone who could discuss wine pairings and vacation homes with casual expertise. Watching her perform this version of herself, I started to wonder if the daughter I'd raised still existed underneath this polished exterior. Wedding morning arrived with that peculiar mixture of chaos and sentimentality that seems to surround all major family events. I arrived at Jessica's hotel suite early to help her get ready, carrying the small jewelry box that contained the pearl earrings my grandmother had worn to her own wedding. For a few precious hours, it felt like we'd found our way back to each other. Jessica was nervous in the most beautiful way, alternating between excitement and panic as the reality of getting married settled in. I helped her into her wedding dress, carefully fastening each tiny button while she talked about her hopes for the future with Jake. In those quiet moments, brushing her hair and adjusting her veil, she was my little girl again, the one who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms and ask me to tell her stories about when she was a baby. She thanked me for everything I'd done for her, and for just a moment, I thought maybe I'd been imagining the distance between us. Maybe the stress of wedding planning and transitioning into married life had created misunderstandings that would disappear once the ceremony was over. I allowed myself to hope that after today we'd find our way back to the closeness we'd once shared. The ceremony itself was absolutely beautiful. Jessica looked radiant walking down the aisle, and Jake's face when he saw her was pure love and admiration. I sat in the family section feeling genuinely happy for them both, proud of the woman my daughter had become, grateful that she'd found someone who clearly adored her. For those 30 minutes surrounded by flowers and music and the joy of two people committing their lives to each other, everything felt perfect. The reception venue was elegant in a way that took my breath away. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables decorated with white roses and gold accents. The Harrison family had spared no expense creating an atmosphere of sophistication and celebration that felt like something from a magazine. I found myself seated at a table with family friends and distant relatives rather than at the immediate family table, but I told myself it was probably just a logistical decision. As dinner progressed, I became increasingly aware of conversations happening around me. Jake's relatives discussed their various business ventures, vacation properties, and social connections with the casual confidence of people who'd never worried about money. They were kind enough to include me in their conversations, asking polite questions about my work and life, but I could feel the careful way they measured their words, the subtle acknowledgement that I didn't quite belong in their world. Jessica moved through the reception like royalty, graciously accepting congratulations and charming everyone she encountered. She'd fully embraced her role as the newest member of the Harrison family, discussing future plans that involved country club memberships and vacation homes with the kind of casual entitlement that comes from feeling like you finally belong somewhere prestigious. As the evening moved toward the traditional toasts, I found myself looking forward to hearing Jessica speak about our journey together, about the love and support that had brought us to this moment. I'd prepared my own words about watching her grow up, about the pride I felt seeing her happiness. I expected this to be our moment of reconnection, the part of the evening where our bond would be celebrated and acknowledged. The toast portion of the evening began with Jake's father standing to address the room. Mr. Harrison spoke eloquently about his son's achievements, about the promising future that lay ahead for the young couple, about the joy of welcoming Jessica into their family. His words were warm and generous, painting a picture of success and prosperity that made everyone smile and nod approvingly. Jake's best man followed with a humorous speech about their college friendship, sharing stories about Jake's determination and character that had everyone laughing and raising their glasses. The mood in the room was celebratory and warm, exactly what you'd want for a wedding reception. I felt genuinely happy listening to these tributes to Jake, grateful that my daughter had found someone so well regarded by the people who knew him best. Then Jessica stood up, elegant and poised in her beautiful wedding dress, and the room fell into expectant silence. I felt that familiar surge of maternal pride watching her command the attention of 60 well-dressed guests, all of them focused on her with obvious admiration and affection. This was her moment to shine, to express her gratitude and share her joy with everyone who'd come to celebrate with them. She began graciously thanking everyone for being there for their support and love throughout her relationship with Jake. Her voice was strong and confident as she talked about their love story, about the moment she knew Jake was the person she wanted to spend her life with. She was articulate and charming, every inch the sophisticated young woman who belonged in this elegant setting. Then her tone shifted slightly as she moved into the gratitude portion of her speech. She thanked her teachers and professors who had nurtured her academic development. She mentioned her mentors who had guided her career choices and helped her develop professional skills. She acknowledged Jake's family for their warmth and generosity in welcoming her into their circle. I especially want to thank Jake's family, she continued, for showing me what success really looks like, for demonstrating the kind of stability and achievement that I'd only dreamed about growing up. My stomach began to clench as I sensed where this was heading. The words felt carefully chosen, deliberately crafted to create a specific impression about her background and upbringing. I found myself leaning forward slightly, hoping I was misinterpreting the direction of her comments. Growing up, I didn't have much. Jessica continued, her voice gaining strength and confidence. My mother worked multiple low-paying jobs, and we struggled financially. There were times when I wasn't sure how we were going to make ends meet, when I had to watch other kids have opportunities that seemed completely out of reach for someone like me. The room was completely silent now, everyone hanging on her words, with the kind of respectful attention reserved for deeply personal revelations. I felt my face burning with embarrassment and confusion as she continued to paint our life together as some kind of hardship story, something she'd had to overcome rather than something we'd navigated together. I learned early that I had to work twice as hard because I came from, well, let's just say humble beginnings. I had to prove myself, constantly had to excel academically because I knew education was my only path to a different kind of life. Her voice was growing stronger with each sentence, as if sharing this narrative was empowering her somehow. but every word felt like a betrayal to me, a complete rewriting of the love and sacrifice that had defined our relationship. She was presenting herself as a self-made success story, someone who'd pulled herself up from poverty through sheer determination. I'm grateful to finally be part of a family that understands ambition and achievement, she said, raising her glass toward the Harrison family table. It's amazing what you can accomplish when you're not held back by limiting circumstances. The final blow hit me like a physical punch. Limiting circumstances. 26 years of working myself to exhaustion, of choosing her needs over my own comfort, of celebrating every one of her achievements as if they were my own personal victories, and she was describing me as a limiting circumstance she'd managed to overcome. The room erupted in polite applause, with several guests nodding approvingly at her inspirational story of triumph over adversity. The Harrison family looked particularly pleased, no doubt, feeling validated in their decision to welcome such a determined and accomplished young woman into their circle. But all I could hear was the thundering of my own heartbeat, as 26 years of memories flashed through my mind. Every sacrifice I'd made, every night I'd worked until my hands bled, every meal I'd skipped so she could have new school clothes, every dream I'd deferred so hers could come true. All of it dismissed as something she'd had to overcome rather than something that had been given with love. I reached for my purse with trembling hands, my fingers finding my phone as Jessica sat down to another round of enthusiastic applause. The room was still buzzing with appreciation for Jessica's speech when I slowly pushed back my chair and stood up. Conversations gradually died down as people noticed me, rising, their attention shifting with the kind of polite curiosity that follows unexpected movements during formal events. Jessica's face immediately showed panic as she realized I was preparing to speak. "Mum, sit down," she whispered urgently across the room. "It's not time for family toasts yet. We haven't finished the wedding party speeches." But I was already moving my phone clutched in my hand, my heart pounding with a mixture of hurt and determination that I'd never experienced before. 26 years of biting my tongue, of accepting whatever version of our story Jessica wanted to tell, of prioritizing her comfort over my own dignity, had just come to an abrupt end. "Actually, sweetheart," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet reception hall, "I think now is perfect timing." The room fell into complete silence as I reached the center of the dance floor. 60 pairs of eyes were focused on me with varying degrees of curiosity, confusion, and concern. Jessica looked absolutely mortified, her face pale against her white wedding dress. Jake appeared puzzled but supportive, clearly unsure what was happening but ready to stand by his new wife. I took a deep breath and began to speak, my voice steady despite the emotional storm raging inside me. "I need to share something with all of you, something that I think puts Jessica's inspiring story into a different perspective. For the past 26 years, I've been deliberately living below my means, choosing to maintain a modest lifestyle for a very specific reason. You see, the cleaning business I started as a single mother didn't stay small. It grew into a commercial cleaning company that services major office buildings throughout the city. I own several properties, have substantial investments, and could have provided Jessica with every luxury imaginable. The room's energy shifted dramatically as people began to process what I was saying. I could see confusion on faces that had moments earlier been nodding approvingly at Jessica's rags to riches narrative. Mr. and Mrs. Harrison exchanged glances that suggested they were rapidly reassessing everything they thought they knew about our family's circumstances. I deliberately chose to live simply because I wanted Jessica to understand the value of hard work, to develop her own character and determination without the cushion of obvious wealth. I wanted her to earn her achievements through her own effort, rather than through advantages I could have easily provided. Jessica's face had gone from pale to absolutely ashen. She was staring at me with a mixture of shock, horror, and dawning realization that her carefully constructed narrative was crumbling in front of everyone she'd been trying to impress. "But I need you all to hear something," I continued, pulling out my phone. "This is a recording of a conversation Jessica had with her friend last week, talking about her family and her feelings about this wedding." The silence in the room became absolutely deafening as I played the audio file I'd saved from Jessica's accidentally pocket-dialed call. Her voice came through the phone's speaker with crystal clarity, casual and unguarded in a way that made her recorded words even more devastating. "I'm honestly embarrassed by my pathetic mother," Jessica's voice said through the phone speaker. "She's such a failure working those dead-end jobs her whole life. I can't wait to be done with this wedding so I can finally stop pretending she matters." Having to include her in family photos is honestly humiliating. She's just dead weight that I've had to carry my whole life. The room was so quiet. You could hear people breathing. The Harrison family sat frozen in their chairs, their faces showing shock and obvious discomfort with what they were hearing. Jake looked absolutely stricken, staring at his new wife with an expression of complete bewilderment. "I've paid for Jessica's education through a scholarship fund I created anonymously." I continued, my voice remaining steady despite the pain radiating through my chest. "I could have bought this entire venue without thinking twice about the expense. I own the building where Jake's family's accounting firm leases their office space." Jessica tried to stand up, tried to say something, but no words came out. She sat back down heavily, her carefully constructed world collapsing around her with each revelation I shared. "Success isn't about what you have," I said, looking directly at my daughter. "It's about who you become when you think no one important is watching." Today, I learned exactly who my daughter became, and honestly, I'm not sure I recognize her anymore. I reached into my purse and pulled out an envelope, setting it on the head table in front of Jessica and Jake. "This contains the deed to the house I bought for you as a wedding gift. It's fully paid for in a neighborhood you've always admired. Consider it my final contribution to the life you're building without limiting circumstances." I turned and walked toward the exit, my head held high, despite the complete devastation I felt inside. Behind me, I could hear the beginning of hushed conversations, the kind of urgent, whispered discussions that happen when social dynamics shift dramatically in public settings. I didn't look back, didn't give Jessica a chance to respond or try to explain. 26 years of unconditional love had just been exposed as one-sided, and I needed to process that reality somewhere far away from this room full of strangers who'd just witnessed the most painful moment of my life. The weeks following Jessica's wedding were the darkest period I'd experienced since those early days as a struggling single mother. The silence from Jessica was deafening, broken only by a few text messages that felt more like damage control than genuine remorse. She tried calling several times, but I wasn't ready to hear explanations or apologies that might just be attempts to manage the social fallout from that disastrous reception. I spent those first few weeks examining every aspect of our relationship, trying to understand how we'd reached this point without me realizing how deep her resentment ran. Had I been too protective, shielding her from our financial realities to the point where she couldn't appreciate the sacrifices involved? Had my desire to teach her independence and self-reliance somehow translated into making her feel abandoned or unsupported? The healing process was slow and painful, filled with late-night conversations with longtime friends who helped me see that Jessica's behavior reflected her own insecurities and character development rather than my failures as a mother. I started seeing a therapist who specialized in family dynamics, working through the complex emotions of loving someone who had publicly rejected and humiliated me. During this period of reflection, I made some important decisions about boundaries and self-respect that I should have made years earlier. I realized that in my efforts to support Jessica unconditionally, I'd enabled her to take my love and sacrifices for granted. My unconditional giving had somehow created conditions where she felt entitled to my support without reciprocating respect or appreciation. 3 months after the wedding, Jessica showed up at my house unannounced on a rainy Thursday evening. She looked exhausted and genuinely remorseful in a way I hadn't seen since she was a child, caught in some significant misbehavior. We sat at my kitchen table, the same place where we'd shared countless meals and conversations throughout her childhood, and finally had the honest discussion we should have had months earlier. She told me about the aftermath of the wedding reception, how the Harrison family had questioned her character and honesty, how Jake had struggled to reconcile the woman he'd married with the person revealed in that recorded phone call. She'd been forced to confront the ugly reality of her own words, to acknowledge that her pursuit of social acceptance had led her to betray the person who'd loved her most consistently throughout her life. Jessica apologized genuinely and thoroughly, not with excuses or justifications, but with real acknowledgement of how deeply she'd hurt me and how wrong her behavior had been. She talked about the shame she felt when she realized how she'd rewritten our history, how she'd allowed her insecurities about our socio-economic background to overshadow her appreciation for the love and support I'd provided. The rebuilding process was gradual and sometimes frustrating, requiring us to establish new patterns of communication and mutual respect. Jessica had to learn to appreciate our relationship for what it actually was, rather than being embarrassed by what it wasn't. I had to learn to accept her apologies without immediately returning to the unconditional giving that had enabled her taking me for granted. Over time, we developed a healthier dynamic built on honesty rather than my constant accommodation of her needs and preferences. Jessica began to understand the extent of my sacrifices, not as limitations she'd overcome, but as expressions of love that had shaped her opportunities. She started asking questions about my business success, showing genuine interest in understanding the woman I was, beyond my role as her mother. Our relationship today isn't the same as it was during her childhood, but it's more authentic and mutually respectful. Jessica has learned to value loyalty and family bonds over social status, partly through experiencing how conditional acceptance can be when it's based solely on external appearances. She's become more thoughtful about how her words and actions affect others, more aware of the difference between earned success and inherited advantages. The experience taught me invaluable lessons about parenting self-worth and the importance of maintaining personal dignity even within the closest family relationships. I learned that loving someone unconditionally doesn't mean accepting disrespectful behavior unconditionally, that teaching children values requires modeling self-respect as well as generosity. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is allowing them to face the consequences of their choices, even when those consequences are painful for both of you. Real love requires the courage to maintain standards for how you expect to be treated, even by the people you love most deeply. True family bonds are built on mutual respect and appreciation, not one-sided sacrifice and accommodation. Looking back, that terrible wedding reception was actually the beginning of a more honest and mature relationship with my daughter. It forced both of us to confront uncomfortable truths about respect, gratitude, and the difference between supporting someone and enabling their worst impulses. Our bond today is stronger because it's based on who we actually are, rather than who I was willing to pretend to be for the sake of keeping peace. The house I bought for Jessica and Jake became the foundation for rebuilding our relationship. They live there now, and Jessica has slowly begun to understand the depth of planning and love that went into that gift. She's learning to see our past differently, recognizing the strength and determination it took for me to build a successful business while raising her alone, appreciating the intentional choices I made about lifestyle and values, rather than viewing our modest living as evidence of failure. Have you ever had to set boundaries with someone you love deeply, even when it felt like it might damage your relationship permanently? What would you have done if you were in my situation that day? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Please like this video if my story resonated with you and subscribe for more real-life experiences about family relationships and finding your way through difficult situations. Share this with someone who might need to hear that standing up for yourself doesn't mean you love your family any less. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to accept treatment that diminishes your worth. Take care of yourselves out there.